You shouldn't be here. The voice came from behind him, calm but firm enough to stop his breath halfway through his chest. Daniel Harper slowly turned around, his boots pressing into the dry wooden floor that groaned under his weight. The ranch house was supposed to be empty. That was the whole reason he bought it. No owners, no tenants, no past waiting inside. Just land, just silence. But now silence was gone. He had bought the entire property 3 days ago for $1. One single, wrinkled bill placed in the shaking hand of Walter Briggs, a man whose eyes carried the kind of tired that didn't come from age, but from loss. Daniel didn't ask many questions at the time. He didn't want answers. He only wanted distance. Distance from Houston, from failed business deals, from the bank calls that came every morning like clockwork, from the quiet disappointment in his younger brother's voice. This ranch, abandoned for more than 2 decades, had been unwanted by everyone else. The land was cracked from years of drought. Fence posts leaned sideways like they had given up trying to stand. The windmill hadn't turned in so long that rust had frozen its blades in place. People in the nearest town avoided talking about it for too long. They used short sentences, changed the subject quickly. Some said the place carried bad luck. Others said it carried memories that refused to leave. Daniel didn't believe in luck, good or bad. He believed in running. When he first drove through the broken front gate, dust rose behind his truck like smoke from a dying fire. The house stood in the distance, tired but stubborn. Its paint had faded into a dull gray. The porch sagged slightly on one side, like it was too exhausted to hold itself straight. Still it was standing. That was enough. Inside, the air smelled old. Not rotten, just forgotten. Dust covered every surface, turning tables and chairs into shapes instead of furniture. A cracked picture frame hung crooked on the wall. The photo inside had faded so badly that the faces were nothing more than ghosts of shadows. Daniel walked deeper inside, each step slow and careful. The quiet felt heavy here, not peaceful, watchful. He told himself it was just his imagination. Then he heard it, a faint shift, like fabric brushing against wood. He froze. His eyes moved toward the hallway at the far end of the house. The door that was slightly open. He was sure it had been closed before. He remembered noticing it when he first stepped inside. Now it wasn't. A soft, warm light spilled through the crack. Daniel's chest tightened. There was no electricity. He had checked. He stepped forward, his heartbeat steady but louder than he liked. His hand reached the doorknob. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at it, wondering if opening it would change something he couldn't undo. Then he pushed it open. The room was small, simple, and alive. A lantern sat on a wooden crate, casting golden light across the walls. Blankets were folded neatly in the corner. Glass jars lined the floor, filled with preserved food. Books were stacked carefully beside them, their pages worn from use. And standing near the lantern was a girl. She couldn't have been older than 17. Her brown hair fell unevenly around her shoulders, like it had been cut without a mirror. Her clothes were old but clean. Her eyes stayed locked on his, steady and unafraid. She didn't move. Neither did he. The air between them stretched tight. Finally, she spoke. "You need to leave." Daniel blinked, caught off guard by how certain she sounded. "I own this place," he said quietly. Her expression didn't change. "No," she replied. "You don't." The words hung there. He let out a slow breath. "I bought it. From Walter Briggs." Something flickered in her eyes then. Not shock. Something deeper. Something heavier. She looked down for a moment, then back at him. He thought I was gone. Daniel felt confusion settle in his chest. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, like the truth was something fragile. Then she said it. "He's my grandfather." The words hit harder than he expected. Walter never mentioned a granddaughter. Not once. Daniel looked around the room again. The lantern, the food, the books. This wasn't someone passing through. This was someone surviving. "How long have you been here?" he asked. She swallowed, her voice quieter now. 3 years. Daniel stared at her, trying to understand how someone so young had lived alone in a place everyone else had abandoned. Outside, the wind pushed against the house, rattling the loose boards. Inside, everything had changed. He came here to escape his past. But now, standing in front of her, he realized this place wasn't empty. It never had been. And somehow, without meaning to, he had just stepped into a promise he didn't yet understand. Daniel didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring at her, tried to connect the fragile girl in front of him with the broken old man who had handed him the ranch like it meant nothing. Walter Briggs hadn't looked like someone who had left family behind. He looked like someone who had lost everything. "You've been here alone?" Daniel finally asked. She nodded once. No drama. No need for explanation. Just a simple truth she had been carrying longer than anyone should. The lantern light flickered gently across her face, revealing the quiet strength in her eyes. Not the kind that came from confidence. The kind that came from surviving things you never chose. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily," she said. The name settled into the room. Daniel ran a hand across the back of his neck, unsure of what he was supposed to do next. He had expected broken walls, empty rooms, silence. Not this. Not her. "I didn't know," he said honestly. "He never told me." Emily gave a small shrug, like she had expected that answer all along. "He wouldn't," she said. "He thought if people knew I was still here, they'd make me leave." Daniel frowned. "Why didn't you go with him?" For the first time, her composure cracked. Not completely, just enough to reveal the truth underneath. "Because this is my home," she said softly. The words were simple, but they carried weight. The kind that didn't need explanation. Daniel looked around again. The careful way everything had been arranged. The jars labeled in neat handwriting. The blankets folded tightly. This wasn't a temporary shelter. This was someone holding on to the last piece of their life. "You stayed through winters?" he asked. She nodded. "There's a small stove in the back room," she said. "I fixed it. And the roof only leaks when the rain is heavy." She said it like she was giving a tour, like she had learned to live with problems instead of solving them. Daniel felt something uncomfortable shift inside his chest. Not pity, respect. "You weren't scared?" he asked. Emily looked at him for a long moment before answering. "At first," she admitted, "every sound felt like something coming to take the place away from me." She paused, but after a while, the quiet stopped feeling like an enemy. Daniel understood that more than he wanted to admit. Silence could hurt, but it could also protect. Outside, the wind howled softly across the open land, pressing against the walls like it was listening. "You the one people saw at night?" he asked. "The lantern in the barn." She gave a small nod. "I had to check the animals," she said. "Animals. A few stayed behind. Chickens mostly. One old horse for a while. He died last spring." She said it plainly, but her eyes dropped when she finished. Daniel noticed that. Loss didn't need tears to be real. He walked slowly to the window, looking out across the endless stretch of dry land. This place had been dying long before he arrived. But somehow, she had kept a piece of it alive. "Why didn't you tell your grandfather?" he asked. Emily's voice grew quieter. "He already lost enough," she said. "If he knew I stayed, he would have blamed himself." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Walter had sold the ranch for $1. Not because it was worthless, because he believed there was nothing left to protect. But he had been wrong. Daniel turned back to her. She looked small standing there. Not weak, just young. Younger than someone who should have carried this much responsibility alone. She met his eyes again. "So what happens now?" she asked. The question hung between them. Daniel didn't have an answer. Legally, the ranch was his. Legally, she wasn't supposed to be here. But this didn't feel like a legal moment. This felt human. He thought about everything he had lost in the past year. His business, his money, his sense of direction. He had come here hoping to find emptiness. Instead, he had found someone who had refused to give up on something he had almost walked away from himself. "I don't know," he admitted. It was the first honest thing he had said in a long time. Emily studied his face carefully, like she was trying to decide if he was someone who stayed or someone who eventually left like everyone else. Daniel understood that look, because he had worn it himself. And for the first time since arriving, he realized this ranch wasn't just broken land. It was a test. He just didn't know yet what it was asking from him. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He lay on the old couch in the living room, staring at the ceiling where cracks spread like veins through faded paint. The house made small noises as the temperature dropped. Wood shrinking, nails shifting, the quiet breathing of something that had been standing longer than either of them had been alive. He could see the faint glow of Emily's lantern down the hallway. She hadn't closed her door completely. Maybe she didn't trust him yet. Maybe she had learned never to trust anything completely. He understood that too. Daniel folded his hands over his chest and exhaled slowly. Just a week ago, his biggest worry had been debt collectors and bank notices. Now, it was a 17-year-old girl who had survived alone on land everyone else had abandoned. He didn't know which one felt heavier. Around midnight, he heard soft footsteps. Careful, measured. He turned his head slightly and saw her silhouette move toward the front door. She carried the lantern in one hand and pulled her jacket over her shoulders. "Where are you going?" he asked quietly. She stopped. For a moment, she didn't turn around. "Barn," she said. "I need to check something." Daniel pushed himself up from the couch. "At this hour?" She finally looked back at him. "The wind gets worse at night," she said simply. Like that explained everything. Maybe it did. He grabbed his boots. "I'll come with you." She hesitated. He could see in her face. She wasn't used to someone offering help. Not because she didn't want it. Because she didn't expect it. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he replied. That was enough. Outside, the air was cold and dry. The desert stretched endlessly under the moonlight, pale and quiet. The barn stood about 50 yards from the house, its shape dark against the open land. As they walked, Daniel noticed how Emily moved. She stepped carefully, her eyes scanning the ground without thinking. She knew every inch of this place. Every rock, every weak board, every sound. "How'd you learn all this?" he asked. She kept walking. "When you don't have anyone else," she said, "you pay attention." The answer stayed with him. Inside the barn, the smell of dust and old hay filled the air. The lantern light revealed tools hanging neatly along the wall. A shovel, a hammer, rope coiled carefully on a nail. Nothing here was random. Emily walked to the far corner and stopped. Daniel followed her gaze. A section of the roof had shifted slightly. The wood creaked as wind pressed against it. "I fixed that last winter," she said quietly. "Storm must have loosened it." She set the lantern down and reached for the ladder. Daniel stepped forward. "I'll do it." She looked at him, unsure. "I used to work construction," he explained. That wasn't entirely true. He had owned a construction company, but it had been a long time since he had done the work himself. Still, his hands remembered. He climbed the ladder carefully, each step groaning under his weight. At the top, he pressed against the loose board, testing its strength. It held. He adjusted it slowly, securing it back into place. Below him, Emily held the lantern steady, her eyes never leaving his hands. After a moment, the creaking stopped. The board stayed still. Daniel climbed down. "That should hold," he said. Emily looked up at the roof, then back at him. "Thank you," she said. It was quiet, honest. He nodded. For a moment, neither of them moved. The barn felt different now. Less abandoned. Less alone. "You fixed a lot of this place yourself," he said. She shrugged lightly. It needed someone. The words hit him harder than she realized. It needed someone. Daniel looked around again. This ranch hadn't survived because it was strong. It survived because she refused to let it die. He wondered when he had stopped fighting that hard for his own life. As they walked back toward the house, the wind calmed slightly. The land stretched around them, silent but no longer empty. At the door, Emily stopped. "You're not leaving tomorrow, are you?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. He hadn't made plans yet. Part of him had assumed he would fix a few things, maybe sell the land later. Move on again. That had always been his pattern. Run, reset, repeat. But now, looking at her, he realized leaving wouldn't be simple anymore. "No," he said. Her shoulders relaxed, just barely. It was a small movement. Most people wouldn't notice it. But Daniel did, because for the first time since he arrived, he realized something important. He hadn't just found this ranch. He had been trusted with it. And trust, once given, wasn't something you could walk away from without breaking something far more important than wood or land. The next morning, Daniel woke up to a sound he hadn't heard in years. Metal scraping against metal. He sat up quickly, his body still stiff from sleeping on the old couch. For a second, he didn't remember where he was. Then the smell of dust and dry wood brought everything back. He stood and walked toward the window. Outside, Emily was already awake. She stood near the old windmill, her small figure wrapped in a worn brown jacket that looked too thin for the cold morning air. Her hands gripped a rusted wrench as she struggled to loosen a bolt that had probably been frozen in place for years. Daniel checked his watch. 6:12 a.m. She had been awake long before him. He stepped outside quietly, the wooden porch creaking under his boots. The morning air was sharp, carrying the clean, empty smell of desert stretching for miles. "You're going to hurt your hands doing it like that," he said. Emily looked back, slightly startled, like she wasn't used to being seen. "I almost got it," she replied, though her voice carried more determination than confidence. Daniel walked over and held out his hand. "Let me try." She hesitated, not because she didn't want help, because she wasn't used to having it. After a moment, she handed him the wrench. Their fingers brushed briefly. Her hands were cold, rough, not the hands of someone her age, the hands of someone who had learned survival before comfort. Daniel crouched down beside the windmill and examined the bolt. Rust had built up around the edges, locking it in place. "When was the last time this worked?" he asked. Emily shrugged slightly. "Before my grandfather left, I think." Daniel nodded. That meant at least 3 years. He adjusted his grip and applied steady pressure. The metal resisted at first. Then suddenly, it shifted, just a little. Emily leaned forward. "It moved." Daniel gave a small smile. "Yeah, it did." He kept working it slowly, careful not to snap the bolt completely. Years ago, he had learned that forcing things only made them break. Patience was stronger than pressure. After a minute, the bolt loosened enough to turn freely. Emily's face changed. Her eyes lit up with something he hadn't seen before. "Hope. Does that mean it can work again?" she asked. Daniel looked up at the tall, frozen blades of the windmill. "Maybe," he said honestly, "but it'll take time." She nodded quickly. "I can help," she said. He believed her, not because she was strong, because she didn't quit. Together, they worked in silence for a while. The kind of silence that didn't feel uncomfortable. The kind that existed between people who didn't need words to explain themselves. After some time, Daniel sat back, wiping sweat from his forehead. Emily sat beside him on the dry ground. "You don't have to stay here," she said suddenly. He looked at her. "I know," he replied. She picked at the dirt quietly. "People always leave eventually." She said like a fact, not an accusation, not anger, just experience. Daniel didn't answer right away. He thought about Houston, about the office he had built from nothing, about the day he locked the door for the last time, knowing he had failed everyone who believed in him. Leaving had been easier than staying and facing that truth. But Emily hadn't left, even when she had every reason to. "Why didn't you?" he asked softly. She didn't look at him when she answered. "Because if I left," she paused, searching for the words, "then it would really be gone." Daniel felt that sentence settle deep inside his chest. This ranch wasn't just land to her. It was memory. It was family. It was proof that something she loved had existed, and she had refused to be the one who abandoned it. A cold wind passed over them, carrying dust across the open field. Daniel looked at the broken fences, the dry soil, the house barely standing behind them. For the first time, he didn't just see ruin. He saw something waiting for someone to care enough to stay. Emily stood up suddenly. "I should check the back fence," she said. He frowned. "Why?" "Sometimes it falls during the night." She said it casually, like it was normal for a teenager to spend her mornings fixing fences alone. Daniel stood too. "I'll come with you." She looked at him carefully. "You don't have to," she repeated. Daniel met her eyes. "I know." She didn't argue this time. And as they walked side by side across the dry land, Daniel realized something had already started to change inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about what he had lost. He was thinking about what he could still save. The wooden posts had fallen sideways, and the wire lay half buried under dust, like the land itself had slowly swallowed it. Nothing dramatic, just quiet decay, the kind that happened when no one was there to stop it. Emily walked straight toward it without hesitation. "I tried fixing this last month," she said, "but the post wouldn't stay straight." Daniel crouched beside the fallen wood and pressed his hand against it. The surface was dry and splintered, weakened by years of sun and wind. "It's not your fault," he said gently. "The wood's too old." She didn't reply. She just stood there, holding the roll of wire she had carried with her. Always prepared, always expecting something else to break. Daniel noticed the dark circles under her eyes. "When was the last time you slept?" he asked. She shrugged. "I sleep." It wasn't an answer. He stood and brushed the dust from his jeans. "You don't have to do everything alone anymore." The words came out before he fully thought about them. Emily looked at him, searching his face carefully, like she was trying to decide if those words were real or temporary. "People say that," she replied quietly, "but they don't mean forever." Daniel didn't know how to respond, because forever was a promise he had never been able to keep. Not with his business, not with the people who trusted him, not even with himself. But standing here now, he realized something. This wasn't about forever. This was about today. And today, she wasn't alone. "I mean today," he said. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she gave a small nod. It was enough. They worked together in silence. Daniel dug a new hole for the post, pushing the shovel deep into the stubborn ground. Each movement sent small shocks through his arms. His body wasn't used to this kind of work anymore. Not after years behind a desk. But he welcomed the pain. It reminded him he was still capable of building something. Emily held the post steady while he packed dirt tightly around its base. "Like that," he said. She didn't let go right away. She tested it carefully, her hands pressing against the wood. "It's stronger," she said. Daniel nodded. "It'll hold." They stretched the wire next, pulling it tight between the posts. Emily's hands moved with quiet confidence. She had done this before. Many times. "You learned all this yourself?" he asked. "My grandfather taught me some," she said. "Before he left." She paused. "The rest, I figured out." Daniel, imagine her out here alone, fixing fences, carrying water, protecting something everyone else had forgotten. Not because she was forced to, because she chose to. "You shouldn't have had to," he said. She looked at him, confused. "Had to what? Grow up this fast?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked out across the land. The dry fields, the endless horizon. "I didn't think about it," she said finally. "I just did what needed to be done." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. That was the difference between surviving and living. Surviving didn't give you choices. It only gave you responsibilities. After they finished, Emily stepped back and looked at the repaired fence. A small smile appeared on her face. Not big, not dramatic, but real. It was probably the first time in a long while that something had been fixed without costing her everything. Daniel noticed it, and without realizing it, he smiled too. Later, as they walked back toward the house, Emily spoke again. "Why did you buy this place?" she asked. Daniel thought about the real answer. Failure. Shame. Running. But he didn't say those words. "I needed somewhere quiet," he said. She nodded, like she understood more than he had explained. They reached the porch steps. Emily stopped before going inside. "You're different," she said. Daniel frowned slightly. "Different how?" She hesitated. "You fix things." The word stayed with him long after she went inside. Because the truth was, he'd spent the last year watching everything in his life fall apart. This was the first time he had fixed anything. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wanted to fix more. Not for money, not for pride, but because someone was finally depending on him, and he didn't want to be another person who walked away. Days began to form a rhythm neither of them talked about, but both of them felt. Daniel woke up earlier than he had in years. Not because of alarms or phone calls, but because the ranch itself demanded attention. Wood needed replacing. Hinges needed oil. The well needed inspection. Every part of the land had something to say, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel listened. One morning, he found Emily sitting on the porch steps, holding a small notebook. She closed it quickly when she noticed him. "What's that?" he asked. "Nothing," she said. He didn't push. But later, when she left to check the storage shed, he noticed the notebook resting beside her lantern. He didn't open it. He just saw her name written on the front. Emily Briggs. Under it, in smaller letters, were words that stayed with him. Things that still matter. When she returned, he pretended he hadn't noticed. "You hungry?" he asked. She gave a small shrug. "A little." He had driven into town the day before and bought groceries. Real groceries. Bread, eggs, coffee. Normal things. He cooked awkwardly, burning the first batch of eggs. Emily watched quietly, like she wasn't used to seeing someone try and fail at something so ordinary. "You're not very good at that," she said. He laughed softly. "I used to pay people to cook for me." She tilted her head slightly. "What happened?" He paused. "I ran out of money." She didn't laugh. She didn't judge. She just nodded, like she understood what losing something important felt like. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the heavy silence from before. It was calmer, safer. Later that afternoon, Daniel decided to inspect the well behind the barn. The cover was old and cracked. He removed it carefully and looked inside. Dry. His chest tightened. "Is it always like this?" he asked when Emily walked over. She nodded slowly. "Sometimes water comes back after storms," she said. "But not for long." Daniel stared down into the darkness. Water meant life. Without it, nothing here could truly survive. He spent the next hour checking the pipes, clearing debris, doing anything he could. His hands grew dirty. His muscles ached. But he didn't stop. Emily sat nearby, watching him. "Why are you trying so hard?" she asked. He looked at her. Because no one else did. Because she deserved more than survival. Because leaving wasn't an option anymore. But he didn't say those words. Instead, he said, "Because it deserved a chance." She didn't reply, but he saw something in her eyes. Belief. Not on the ranch. In him. That scared him more than failure ever had. Because belief meant responsibility. And responsibility meant he couldn't run. Not this time. That night, Daniel sat alone on the porch after Emily went to sleep. The sky stretched endlessly above him, filled with cold, distant stars. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about what he had lost. He was thinking about what he might still become. And that possibility felt fragile, but real. The storm came without warning. The wind hit first, sharp and violent, slamming against the house like it was trying to tear it apart. Daniel woke instantly, his heart racing as the windows rattled. He stood and saw Emily already in the hallway, holding her lantern. "I need to check the barn," she said. "No," he replied quickly. "It's too dangerous. The roof won't hold if the support breaks." She was already reaching for her jacket. Daniel grabbed his boots. "You're not going alone." Outside, the wind howled across the open land, carrying dust and sand that stung their faces. The barn groaned loudly, its old frame trembling under the pressure. Inside, one of the support beams had shifted. Emily saw it immediately. "That wasn't like that before," she said. Daniel stepped closer, his stomach tightening. If the beam gave out, part of the roof would collapse. Without thinking, he grabbed a nearby wooden post. "Hold the lantern steady," he said. She did. He pushed the post under the weakened beam, using all his strength to force it into place. His arms shook from the effort. The wood resisted. The wind screamed outside. For a moment, he thought it would fail. Then suddenly, it held. The beam stopped moving. Daniel staggered back, breathing heavily. Emily stared at the beam, then at him. "You could have gotten hurt," she said. He gave a tired smile. "So could you." They stood there for a moment, the storm raging around them. Emily's voice grew quieter. "People don't usually stay," she said. Daniel looked at her. Rain began to fall through small cracks in the roof, dripping onto the dirt floor. "I know," he said. She hesitated. "Why are you?" The question hung between them. He thought about Houston, about failure, about running. Then he thought about her, alone, waiting for something that never came. "I made a promise," he said. She frowned slightly. "You never said one." He nodded. "I know. Some promises weren't spoken. They were proven." And for the first time in his life, Daniel understood that staying wasn't weakness. It was courage. Outside, the storm continued. But inside the barn, something stronger had already begun to take root. Not in the wood, not in the walls. In him. Morning came slowly after the storm. The air felt different, cleaner, like something heavy had finally passed. Daniel stepped outside and looked across the ranch. The ground was damp in places where rain had touched it. Not enough to change everything, but enough to remind him that change was still possible. Behind him, he heard the screen door open. Emily stepped onto the porch, holding her jacket close around her. Her eyes moved across the land the same way his had. Careful, protective. The barn still standing, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. Yeah. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Emily walked down the steps and stopped near the windmill. She reached out and rested her hand on the metal frame, like she was checking on an old friend. I used to think I was the only one fighting for this place, she admitted. Daniel leaned against the porch railing. You were, he said gently. For a long time. She looked back at him, but not anymore. The words stayed between them, not as a promise, as a truth. Later that day, Daniel made a drive into town. He hadn't told Emily why. He just said he'd be back before dark. He parked outside a small apartment building and sat in his truck for a moment, staring at the front door. Walter Briggs opened it before Daniel even knocked. The old man looked smaller than before, like time had been quietly taking pieces of him. I didn't expect to see you again, Walter said. Daniel nodded. There's something you need to know. They sat inside, across from each other. Walter listened without interrupting as Daniel explained everything. Emily, the lantern, the 3 years she had survived alone. When Daniel finished, Walter's hands were shaking. She stayed, he whispered. Daniel nodded. Walter covered his face, overcome by something deeper than regret. I thought she was gone, he said. I thought she deserved better than that broken place. Daniel understood that feeling, wanting to protect someone, but not knowing how. You should come back, Daniel said. Walter looked up slowly. I don't own it anymore. Daniel shook his head. Some things don't belong to paper. That evening, Emily stood near the fence when she saw the truck returning. She didn't recognize the second figure at first. Then she froze. Walter stepped out slowly, his eyes already filled with tears. For a moment, neither of them moved. 3 years of distance stood between them. Then Emily ran. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough. Walter held her tightly, like he was afraid she might disappear again. I'm sorry, he whispered. She shook her head against his shoulder. You're here now. Daniel watched from a distance. He didn't interrupt. This wasn't his moment, but he felt something settle inside him. Peace. Weeks passed. Grass began to return in small patches. The windmill turned for the first time, slow and stubborn. Water flowed again, not strong but steady. Life didn't come back all at once. It came back because someone stayed long enough to let it. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, Emily stood beside Daniel near the fence. You could have left, she said. He nodded. I know, but you didn't. He looked out across the land. I spent a long time running from things, he said. I thought leaving made the pain easier. He paused. But some things don't need distance. He looked at her. They need someone willing to stay. Emily smiled quietly. Not because everything was perfect, but because it wasn't broken anymore. Not completely. Daniel never became rich again. The ranch never became famous. But it became something more important. It became a place where promises were kept. Because in the end, he learned something the hard way. Strength wasn't in walking away when things fell apart. Strength was in staying when leaving would have been easier. And sometimes, saving a place didn't just bring land back to life. It brought people back too.